Are you looking to sharpen your budgeting skills? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast, where we talk about life, family, and how to afford it. And now, the Budget Couple themselves, Nate and Danielle.
Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast. I'm Nate.
And I'm Danielle.
And on this episode, we're going to talk about student loans and the potential for student loan consolidation. This is actually an episode dedicated to one of our listeners who wrote a question in, and we're going to take the time to answer it fully. But before we dive into this, we just want to ask you, if you could, to leave us a review on Apple iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. It helps us grow the show and reach more people, and hopefully to help more people with their budgeting journey. As always, you can visit our website, budgetcouple.com, and you can leave us feedback if you have questions, because we love answering questions and love helping you guys out if you have budgeting questions. So, with that said, let's get on to the email that we received from one of our listeners.
Our listener told us about their student loan experience so far. So they have 11 student loans out there. Yee. It's a little scary thinking about that many loans. The amounts are actually ranging from $500 to $5,000. So we don't know at this point how much in all the debt is. And there are also different interest rates, which is a big deal. She says, I am currently not making payments because I applied for an income-based payment, and it's basically $0 a month, and you pay what you can. But her company recently emailed them about something called Common Bond, which can consolidate all your loans for you and basically refinance them. They also give you a sign-up bonus of $500 in cash. So she asks, I was hoping if you could tell me if this was a good idea. She's heard before that consolidation is not necessarily great because you can lose some benefits, and for some other reasons as well. She asked, but if I were to start paying on my lowest amount, like as in a debt snowball, I would have to start paying on them all at the same time, which would make her payments over $300 a month, which can be unaffordable depending on what your budget is, of course. So through the Common Bond, her payments were calculated at $130 for 20 years. And then anything left over at that point, they would forgive. So you would only pay that $130 a month for 20 years. She'd like to learn a little bit more about whether this is a good idea, but is hoping for some advice before she goes and talks to Common Bond about it.
Okay, so that's first off, it's great that you're looking at options for consolidating things and to get them paid off. It's always good to look at your options. Even if your options aren't good, it's nice to know that, just to get a general idea of where you're at and what you can do. So I think we're both on the same page that it's good to look at, even if you wind up not going with it, or even if you do go with it. It's a good thing to take a look at it. When we're taking a look at this, let's just break down some raw numbers just so we kind of know the facts of where we're at. If we're taking $130 a month for 20 years, that's a total of $31,200 that you're going to be paying to your new company that has your loan. That may be more or less than your student loan amount currently is. Like if you have $20,000 in student loans, that $11,200 is going to be purely interest-based. So you're really not saving much money there. But if you're like, let's say $100,000 in debt, then that's a great deal for you. You get like basically $60,000 forgiven, but it takes 20 years to do that. Before we dive into some other things that we're going to talk about here, we don't know the following things, which would really help us be able to kind of narrow in on these questions. And if you ever want to email us back and help us work through those numbers with you, we'll be happy to do that. But we don't know what the current student loan amount is. We don't know the interest rate or average interest rate of the student loan. It's good to know the average interest rate just because then you can kind of figure out if this is helping you or not. If you have a loan that's $500, another one that's $5,000, and the small one has like a 2% interest and the other one has a 6% interest rate, your average interest rate is not 4%. It's way closer to 6%. But we can work through the math and help you figure that out if you need help with that. We also don't know what the new interest rate is going to be. And then finally, we don't know if there are any penalties for paying it off early. Through our initial research through the company that you mentioned, Common Bond, it doesn't look like they have any, but it's a good thing just to know because you want to make sure that if you pay it off early, you're not stuck with extra payments. So those are a couple things that we don't know and we want to make sure are there. Now, before we dive into the pros and cons of debt consolidation for student loans, just immediately, if the interest rate's higher than what you have currently, do not do this. Even though it's going to make nice low interest payment or monthly payments for you, don't do this. You're going to wind up spending more money long term, and potentially a lot more money. So if the interest rate's higher, don't go that way. If it's the same, probably not a good option as well. But if it's lower, it probably is a good option. And we'll talk about kind of how to help you figure that out in just a minute. But we're going to go in and talk about the pros of debt consolidation first. So the first pro in my brain is that I only have one check to write. Now, you said that all 11 of your loans are through the same company, and you probably just go in and pay them all at the same place at the same time, and that's great. But if, let's say, that you have loans with different people, then you have a whole bunch of checks to write. It's easier to forget things. I like things nice and simple. I'm a kind of a simple one-mind track kind of guy.
He is.
Yeah, I definitely am. So I would much rather write one check a month than to write like 11 checks a month. That's just me. But that's what I'd like to do. So I think that's a pro. For some people, that may not be a pro, and sometimes that can cost you extra money. But in this case, it may not. The second pro is that the terms of the loan get extended. So what that generally means is that if your loans, let's say, were for 15 years, now we're moving to 20 years. So by doing that, you're owing the same amount of money, potentially, but you're going to be paying less per month. As an example, if I had $12,000 of debt and I had to pay it back in a year, that would be $1,000 a month that I owe. But if I had to do the same $12,000 over 2 years, my payments get cut in half at $500 a month. There's probably going to be a little bit more interest associated with that. But in general, I'm lowering my monthly output quite a lot, depending on what's going on there. And then you could also get lower interest rates. We don't know what the new interest rate is. We don't know what the current ones are. But you could potentially get lower interest rates. Just please, please, please make sure you look at fixed interest rates. Don't do variable. Don't do hybrid. You want to do fixed because then you're locked in. You know what it is and they can't change it. Whereas a variable one, they can move all over the place, and that would be on the con list. Please, please, please make sure you get a fixed rate.
Another thing to note when it comes to lowering your monthly payment there is, as Nate was saying, it can cut your monthly payment down much lower if you extend a loan out. But just like if you think of your mortgage, if you do a 30-year mortgage versus a 15-year mortgage, your 30-year mortgage is probably going to be a much more lower, much more affordable monthly payment. But if you do a 15-year, you could cut your interest rate by a couple percent, actually.
Like 1.5% to 2%. It's an amazing, and when you're talking about a large amount of money, it adds up very quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, that's something to think about. Just because a lower monthly payment can seem very lucrative and exciting, it helps with your budget, but in the long term, you're paying so much more money potentially. So that's just something in general to think about when you're looking at any sort of loan, really.
Yeah, I would say it's more like death by 1,000 cuts because it's small little things you don't notice, but it adds up in the long term, which is how banks and most financial institutions make money, is long-term slow gains. Whereas you wouldn't notice it, but when they get thousands and thousands of people doing it, it adds up to real money for them.
And you're also reducing your ability to grow your wealth over time too, if you're giving your money to other people constantly. So it's just something to think about. But we're getting sidetracked. So the cons of consolidation. So why shouldn't you do it? So we're unsure whether or not it's a federal or a private loan that you have, but some of the federal loans have some special terms and benefits to them that you may lose when you consolidate. So there's a variety of different things that can cover, but it's something to think about and to look into depending on what type of loan you have. Also, you said you had income-based payments, so those would go away. So in this case, it is wonderful that you don't have to pay currently, and that because you have the lower income, you're able to have your budget be a little more relaxed. But this benefit would go away. So even if you lose your job or you have something happen, maybe something comes up, your payments would still be the same. They wouldn't be able to be reduced by that income-based system. So that's something to think about as well. And as Nate said earlier, we definitely want to steer away from any sort of variable rate loan. So it may sound nice. Again, you can usually get a lower interest rate initially, but it's variable. So it can change dramatically. So you might start with like a 2%, and then the next year it jumps to a 5%. And you just have no idea where it's going to go. And in the long term, usually variable rates mean you pay a lot more.
Not usually. Every time. They always cost. Variable rates don't go down. They only go up. So just remember that while it looks good for short term, and if you can pay it off in like 2 years, you might come out ahead. But other than that, don't do it.
Next, we're going to give you just our suggestions of what we know about your situation and what we've looked into, kind of what would we do in this case. First of all, know your numbers. So we don't know everything, but think through how much debt you owe, your total amount, and think through all of the interest rates of those 11 loans and do some sort of average of that. And you'll be able to know if it's comparable when you're looking at other consolidated loans, whether it be with common bonds or somewhere else. You need to make sure you're thinking about the overall amounts, so the lifetime of the loan type of amounts, and you'll be getting that through the interest rates. So think through that. If the interest rate is fixed and lower than your current rate, then we would probably say go for it, but with a few, I guess, caveats or things you should think about. Pay as much as you can extra on them each month. So again, I always like getting rid of debt as quickly as possible. Even if your monthly payments are a certain amount, go ahead and pay extra if you're able to. That's what we've been doing on our house, as much as we can. On months where we don't have anything to do with that extra money, we put it onto the house and try and pay that off sooner, because that lowers our overall interest payments that we're making in the long run.
Yeah, just as an example, like on our house when we bought it was $350,000. If we paid it off over the 30 years, it's going to cost us roughly $650,000 in payments. But if we're on our current track and pay it off in roughly 15 years or so, it's going to cost us about $450,000. So we saved $200,000 by paying off the house early. While that's a much more dramatic situation than what you're probably in, it still is significant. You're saving tens of thousands of dollars by paying your loan off early than letting it sit around for 20 years.
20 years. Think about that number too. 20 years of payments means that you could actually be paying off your college still while your kid is starting to go to college.
That's terrifying. It's such a real way to put that into perspective, that you could have a human being born and be in college, almost probably halfway through college if you had the baby today, and you'd still be paying on your loans. That's crazy town.
Check to see, again, and we did say this earlier, but it's a really important thing. Check and see if you're allowed to pay off your loan early without any penalties, because you want that ability, you want that flexibility, because over the course of 20 years, your income is going to change dramatically and your needs are going to change. And you might want to get that debt totally out of your mind away. So you want that ability to pay it off early, and you don't want to have to deal with any penalties or fees associated with that.
And we're also going to reiterate that low monthly payments sound very nice, but when you pay something off over a longer period of time, it means you're paying more for that same thing. So again, getting rid of it as quickly as possible is the best financial decision you can make. Even if they forgive money, it takes 20 years for them to make it up to you. Like, you really have to commit to it. And it's not a situation where you're going to come out ahead in most cases. It's going to cost you. Another reason why we really suggest paying off debt as fast as possible is because debt is an anchor on you financially. Not only you financially as far as money in your budget, but when you're trying to do big things like buy a house, get a car, get the lowest interest rate possible, when you have debt, it helps stop those things from happening. So if you want a really high credit score, having a lot of debt is not going to allow it to happen. If you're trying to get a big home loan so you can go through and get a nice house, it's not going to happen because you're not going to be able to afford as much because you have monthly payments sitting around. If you're looking for the best interest rates, that's not going to happen either because you already have debt out there. Banks know that there's a risk with that, and how they cover risk is higher interest rates. So little bits of debt can have massive impacts on everything. Particularly, I think the number one is with houses. Even just like $100 extra a month as a debt can knock you down tens of thousands of dollars on a house that you can afford.
Just go onto any calculator, Zillow, I'm sure many of you have already done this, but go onto a calculator and change up the numbers, play around with them. If you add even like Nate said, $100 or $200 of debt, it dramatically changes how much house you're allowed to buy or you're able to buy. And it's also going to change those interest rates. And that, again, it's a snowball. So you're increasing your interest rates on your house, which then in turn makes you pay more money on your house. So you're just losing money for no reason. So getting rid of debt early is always a good decision.
Yeah. And when we talk about debt snowball, most people talk about paying off debt as quickly as possible, by the smallest to the largest. If you're in a situation where you have debt and you're trying to borrow more money, that's kind of an interest snowball where you're going to be paying money on the interest for the original debt, and now you're paying higher interest rate on something else. So you kind of get into a snowball effect but a worse snowball effect, an opposite one. So you're costing yourself money now and potentially lots of money in the future as well. So please just be careful with that. Do your homework, find out the interest rates, find out where things are at, if this works for you. Again, I think as long as the interest rate's lower and there's no penalties for paying it off early, I would go for it. That would be my personal suggestion, especially because they give you the $500, which sounds amazing. It's not that amazing. It's one of those kind of hooks to kind of get you, but don't worry about the money. That money, if you don't have an emergency fund, put it in there. If you do have an emergency fund set up, pay your student loan debt with it. That $500 knocks out basically 4 months of payments for you. So make sure you do that, and just make sure you can do kind of just debt-based payments as well. So if you put extra, make sure it's not going just on interest. Make sure it's going just on the debt you owe. So if those are all things that work out and the interest rate's lower, go for it. But just be aware, keep paying as much as you possibly can on that just to knock it out as quick as possible. I know forgiveness sounds very nice, but it really just winds up costing you money. You need to forgive them for taking your money.
And we have looked a little bit at Common Bond. It has good ratings online. If you go to places like NerdWallet, they give you some extra information about it, and it's pretty impartial. So you can go on and look for that as well. But don't be too afraid to go and talk to them. Yes, they're biased, but at the same time, they can give you good information about the facts of the loan and what it's going to look like. You just need to go in with smart questions. So you need to ask them things like the prepayment penalties and what the interest rate is, and
is it fixed or variable?
Yeah, and is there any sort of cons that you should know about? Just really go in with the right questions and think through it, and just cover all your bases.
Yeah, and if you need any help doing any of the math, looking through any of these things, or you get the questions back and you're not sure of what their answers mean for you, shoot us an email again. We'll be happy to get back in touch with you. We'll make sure you get everything taken care of, and we want to help you through this process as best as possible. If anybody else has questions out there, you can always contact us at budgetcouple.com, and you can find show notes for this particular episode at budgetcouple.com/episode 30. I think that's going to wrap it up for today, but we love helping you guys out, and hopefully this was a help for you, and we'll see you next time.
We'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Budget Couple Podcast with your hosts, Nate and Danielle. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit budgetcouple.com. Make sure to check out the next episode of the Budget Couple Podcast, where we'll talk more about life, family, and how to afford it. We'll catch you next time.